What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be going over my top 5 criterion for determining if an exercise is good for muscle growth or not. The goal of this video is to hopefully dispel some of the abominable exercises that I have seen on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. And there's such a plethora of misinformation out there on just what grows muscle in the gym. So after this video, you'll have a few practical takeaways to determine what lift you want to choose to grow whatever muscle you want. I hope you guys enjoy. Without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so my first criteria, and these are in no particular order of importance, but I would say this one is number one for a reason. I would give it a slight importance when compared to the other ones. And number one being stability. Now this may seem like a surprise because normally we don't think about stability that often when we're in the gym. But as it turns out, your brain is pretty smart. I know that was a surprise to me because Lord knows our boy be struggling sometimes with the math problems. Stability is the key determinant to how much force the central nervous system decides to output. So the classic example is a barbell back squat versus a Bosu ball squat. So a Bosu ball provides a super unstable surface, so it may be perceptually hard to complete the squatting pattern, but in reality, the actual force output at the muscular level is very minimal because the brain recognizes that there's an unstable surface and there's possibly a risk of injury if we put out a lot of force. You could break something and possibly twist an ankle and whatnot. And a common example that you may have experienced is if you ever walked on an icy surface. It's physically hard to move very fast because your brain is realizing that there's a ton of instability, and so it's going to down-regulate how much force you output. An example of a poor stability exercise would be the dumbbell tricep kickback, where the elbow is being completely supported by the shoulder musculature, and so there's really nothing holding the elbow in place. Criteria number 2 is range of motion. And it's becoming very clear that this is a super important topic in the world of hypertrophy. We know from studies comparing training at long muscle lengths versus short muscle lengths that the longer muscle length training achieves more growth in virtually every case. It's never been contested. I believe there's about 20 studies out now that have shown this effect, that when you achieve a longer muscle length, all else being equal, you will grow more muscle from that set. So if you are to select between, let's say, a quarter squat and a super deep range of motion hack squat, the hack squat theoretically will grow you more muscle on a per set basis, and that movement on paper is a better hypertrophy movement. Criteria number 3 is the progressibility and the loadability of the movement. So even if you have a super stable movement with great range of motion, but you have no way to progress that movement in terms of load or volume, then you're really limiting your ability for that movement to give you great gains in the long run. So most body weight exercises are great from a stability and range of motion standpoint, but at some point you become so well adapted to those movements, you need to add some other external load. So that's where weighted dips, weighted push-ups, barbell back squat, no longer doing body weight squats. That's a necessity in this. And this is where the shortcomings of some gym machines come into play. If you've been training for any significant amount of time, I'm sure you've run into the issue of maxing out a cable stack at the gym or on some pin-loaded machine. Well, when that happens, unless you invest in gym pin, which is becoming more and more popular, it really kind of leads you to a dead end. And once you're super strong and can do that for 20 plus reps, it's just hard to say that that movement is still providing a sufficient stimulus for you to grow. So progressibility and loadability is very important. Also from a psychological standpoint, the ability to keep progressing allows you to push harder on the movement. And we know that pushing close to failure is a pretty good thing for muscle growth. Number 4, tying hand in hand with the range of motion, is the resistance profile of the movement. So that means what portion of the movement are you experiencing the most load? So for any free weight movement, it's basically a linear loading. And the only thing that's modulating how much force your muscle is producing is the changing lengths of the moment arm, which is conducted via your limb length. So at the bottom of the bench press, as your elbows get more flared out, the moment arm between gravity going down and the moment arm at the shoulder is continually increasing. As a result, the torque on the pec is continually increasing. And so that is what we would call a lengthen biased movement, where you have the hardest portion of the resistance at the bottom, or at the portion of the movement where the muscle is at its most lengthened position. And if you look back at the range of motion studies, it's pretty clear that having a high degree of tension at that long muscle length is an important component for muscle growth. And so if you get, like, a common example is a leg extension. Most leg extensions in the gym, number 1, you're shortened at the hip, so the rectus femoris that crosses the hip and the knee is at a shorter position. And number 2, most of them are hardest at the top of the position, where your quads are at their shortest, most contracted position, and the resistance actually drops as you lengthen your quads and lower the weight stack. So in terms of choosing a movement based off a resistance profile, another good example is the lateral raise. So the standard dumbbell lateral raise is hardest at the very top because the moment arm is longest, and then at the bottom is virtually no resistance. You can modulate that by simply moving over to a cable station and doing a cable lateral raise that has the load perpendicular to your arm, basically when your arm is at hip height. So now all of a sudden, you're experiencing the most tension at the delt when your delt is at its longest position in the movement. And then as the delt gets shorter, resistance profile drops off and it gets easier as your delt gets into a more shortened position. Number 5 on this list is enjoyment. So I know I just mentioned the cable lateral raise versus standard lateral raise and just explained to you how the dumbbell lateral raise is suboptimal. Well, as it turns out, enjoyment plays a huge role in how much you can get out of an exercise, and this is something that I don't really see talked about that often. If you have good fundamentals through those basic 4 points that we have so far, and you were going to choose an exercise that was maybe slightly worse based on those 4 criteria before, but you enjoyed the heck out of it a lot more than you did doing the optimal exercise, you're more likely to push yourself and progress on the exercise that you enjoy. So it's very critical from a sustainability standpoint, and more so just like a motivation standpoint, where every time you're in the gym, you're ready to perform because you love doing that movement. I know that movement for me is the leg extension. I happen to love the leg extension because of the feeling I get. It is very stable, but on paper, there are probably better exercises for the quads and specifically the rectus femoris, like a reverse Nordic, which Milo Wolf has kind of popularized, and I've given those a shot, but dude, they just do not feel the same, and I cannot get excited for those like I get excited for a super drop set on the leg extension machine. And if you made it this far, I'll throw in a little bonus tip for you that I just thought of. If an exercise is not joint friendly, so if it doesn't agree with your joints, it doesn't matter how good that exercise is on paper, in the long run, it's not going to serve you to any means, because you're either going to get injured or it's going to become so painful you're not going to be able to push yourself as hard as you need to on those exercises, and so you'll stagnate very fast. So for a lot of people, this is like the skull crusher. It tends to, for whatever reason, some people have great results with it, and some people, all they feel is their elbow screaming at them to stop. Fortunately, I've been lucky enough to have very mobile elbows and not have this issue, but I understand that if something is not good from a joint health perspective or connective tissue perspective, that movement is definitely probably not one that you want to pursue in the long term. And if you do, progress it very smartly so that you don't run into an injury, which is ultimately the killer of all gains. Trust me, I know. I'm coming back from a shoulder surgery, and in just a few months' time, I lost a ton of size on my left shoulder, and strength, and I am still trying to recover in the strength department, even though the muscle returns pretty quick. But getting injured is definitely not optimal from a muscle growth perspective. All right, guys, so those are my 5 tips plus a bonus for determining if an exercise is a good movement. What you'll notice is that when you apply these criteria to a lot of the exercises out there, a lot of the basics come to mind. So the bench press is very stable. It's got a good range of motion. It's length and biased. Squat, pretty stable. Good range of motion. It's length and biased. A lot of these exercises that have been tested, tried and true, remain the top dogs for growing you the most muscle. So a lot of these new flashy exercises that you may see pop up on social media, even especially if they're coming from someone with a great physique, and we won't get into the whole natty or not kind of debates. But if it's coming from someone with a great physique, and even if it looks really cool, it looks hard and it feels hard and it looks like it's growing muscle, we know that applying these principles, the movement would not qualify to make our hypertrophy program. All right, guys, that's all I have for tonight. I hope this is helpful. Drop a comment and let me know what exercises are your favorite, and I will see you in that next video. Wow.